Welcome to How Do They Afford That, the podcast that peeks into the financial lives of everyday Australians. I'm Michael Thompson. I'm a writer and the co-host of the podcast Fear and Greed Business News. And as always, I'm with Canna Campbell, financial planner, founder of Sugar Mama TV, which is, of course, the financial literacy platform covering every single platform known to man. YouTube, podcast, books, Instagram, and more. Hello, Canna.
Good morning, Michael. How are you?
I'm going well, thank you. We do have a savings hack today. But we'll get to it in a moment because it's a savings hack with a difference. How's that for a tease?
Oh, I'm excited.
But what I wanted to do first is mention what we're actually talking about today, what the subject of today is, because a few weeks ago we did a series of interviews on superannuation. One was a super health check, which was covering all of the basics in superannuation. And the other one was the myths and misconceptions around retirement. And there was a heap of interesting stuff that came out of. And it probably sounds like I'm downplaying it a little bit by saying it was interesting stuff.
No, I got passionate.
I know you did. It was actually a
we
little bit
still
frightening.
haven't had a little chat about that as well, by the way. Not getting off that scot-free. But anyway, we'll focus on today's exercise.
If anyone hasn't listened to those episodes, it is worth going back and just listening to Canna just get stuck right into me.
I got really fired up.
Oh, you did. Anyway, we will address this in the future. Stand by for that one. That's a tease. Look, there was one element that came out of that the other week for me, and that was I didn't realise that you could actually get financial advice through your super fund. I did not realise that until we discussed it the other week. And one thing then led to another. And now we're taking a closer look at that advice because we are always on the lookout for ways people can access professional advice. We're always talking about the need to get professional advice and different ways that you can do it depending on what your circumstances are and how much money that you actually have, some cost-effective ways to get some professional advice. Before we get into this and before we introduce our special guest, Canna, we need to mention that anything that we're talking about today is always general in nature. It is never personal, investment, strategic, or product advice. It is purely for financial education purposes only.
Exactly right. We don't know anything about your financial situation, your risk profile, and the deadlines for all of those fabulous financial goals and dreams. So that is why you should always go and talk to a financial planner and ask them for personal advice.
Which feels like a perfect segue into actually introducing someone with that exact background.
Exactly.
And so our guest today, we are joined in the studio today by Matt Waraxo, who is the State Manager of Advice for New South Wales at UniSuper, which is, of course, a supporter of this podcast. Matt, welcome to How Do They Afford That?
Thank you for having me here this morning.
Now, we're going to put you on the spot. I mean, you've had, 2 minutes now warning from when I said we have a special savings hack coming up, and I kind of winked at you to say, kind of, this is you. This is your savings hack. And so that was all the notice we've given you of coming up with a savings hack. Have you got one for us now, having said all of that? Have you got a bit of advice for people to actually save a bit of cash?
I do. So I've got 3 young children at home, and so we're always on the lookout, my wife and I, for some saving hacks. Mm-hmm. So what we do regularly is log on to our state government app. So New South Wales, we've got the Service New South Wales app. Ooh. And there's always different rebates and savings on offer for residents. So whether it's the active kids voucher or different rebates on solar for the household, there's always something. And a lot of Australians leave that on the table. They don't know these are available. And so I definitely recommend to check out your respective state government rebates.
Because there's equivalents in every state, really, isn't there? There's kind of different rebates on offer. And if you don't use them, you lose them, right?
Spot on.
And they actually add up to be quite a lot of money. There's like a First Lap, there's the Creative Kids one. There's so many. And that can be money back in your pocket that you can then put towards your financial goals and dreams, like planning for retirement.
Now, Canna, I don't want to put you on the spot too much.
Oh, dear.
How would you say Matt's tip compared to the tip that I gave a couple of weeks ago?
I'm going to say Matt's tip is a little bit juicier than your fruit and veg.
That seems harsh. I wasn't expecting it to go that way. I thought fruit and veg wins every day, but no, cold hard cash wins every day, it seems.
Yeah.
It all helps.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we are talking about financial advice today, and I think, Matt, it probably helps to kind of set the scene a little bit.
So obviously talking about financial advice, but we're talking about like actually how to get financial advice, because everyone knows it's out there, but a lot of people don't know actually how to tap into it and actually, or don't realize that it's now so much more readily available and can be for some people a lot more cost effective. Before we jump in, I'd love to hear about what made you become a financial planner.
It's a great question, and it was actually by chance. So I was over in the US studying. I did my undergraduate and then my MBA, and financial advice wasn't even on my radar. And I was introduced to a fellow Australian who'd lived there for 20 years and built a really successful financial planning practice. And we struck up a really good relationship, and incredibly, he offered me a role after I graduated. And from there, really got to learn the financial planning process. But what I loved was engaging with clients every day. And from there, I really built a passion for advice and seeing the impact that our advice can make. And 20 years later, here I am.
You mentioned the impact that advice has. What difference does it actually make to people? One of the things actually, that you will realize here is that I make a lot of assumptions on this podcast and just put them out there and then just wait for the experts, you and Canna, to shoot them down. But the assumption that I would make is that a lot of people going into a financial planner, and I'm speaking from experience here, you just don't know what you're doing, and you don't know what is actually out there until someone takes you through it.
Spot on. And it varies so much from day to day, right? When we first meet a member, they have a lot of fear around retirement confidence. So they're unsure whether they're able to meet a certain desired lifestyle throughout retirement. And what we do is really provide an understanding. They want to be heard. Yeah. And really, an advisor's place is really to listen first and foremost, get a really good understanding of what their current position is. And then really from there, really talk about ways to improve their situation and ultimately, hopefully make their dreams come true.
And that's not just in retirement necessarily, isn't it? That is then along the road to retirement.
Absolutely. Even our young members. So whether that's buying their first car or, their first home or trying to get the certain amount of insurance that meets their needs. There's so many different aspects throughout different milestones.
Canna, I don't know what's wrong with me and what you have done to me, but hearing someone say that we can help kind of find the right insurance and all this, I got excited hearing that. I'm like, Canna, you have ruined me with this podcast.
Look, I'm dying to hear, you've worked in America and Australia, which is incredible because they are two very different systems. And so I want to know, you now work with UniSuper. How have you ended up there, and what is it that made UniSuper stand out as being so special for you and your long-lasting home?
Well, I moved back to Australia in 2012, and looking at the financial advice landscape at that point in time, you had the banks, you had small boutique firms, investment firms, and you had superannuation funds providing advice. And really what attracted me to UniSuper in the first instance was its link to the university sector. I've done a lot of work with the universities over in the US, so that was quite attractive at the time. But the more I learnt about UniSuper, I knew that our values were pretty aligned. So UniSuper is very member-centric. They invest in their people, and our advice model is extremely ethical in the fact that we've always followed a fee-for-service model, and our advisors don't take any commissions. So 11 years later, I'm still at UniSuper.
And is that then what makes UniSuper different, I suppose, from other? And one thing that I suppose is another misconception, and I'm acknowledging that it's a misconception as I ask it, that UniSuper is just for people in the university sector.
We used to be.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, we then opened to every Australian. So now we're an open fund. So that's a common misconception. Another common misconception is that financial advice from UniSuper, we can only provide advice on superannuation. That's not the case. So we can talk about all the different levels of advice that we offer at UniSuper, but we do offer holistic financial advice.
I have a question for you around capital gains tax.
I'm kind of just jumping straight in.
Sorry, I might just go for the kill.
That's enough of the preamble. Let me get into the guts of this.
Let's go.
Yep.
Well, I guess I'm very passionate about superannuation. I'm very passionate about people paying attention to it sooner rather than later. And as you would know, the relief that you can create for people by getting them on board with their superannuation early or, as early as possible has a game-changing impact on their life. I quite often talk about the features of superannuation and what to look out for. And one thing I touch on a regular basis is in-specie transfers, particularly for people who are in accumulation phase and want to transfer across to pension phase. How does UniSuper work differently where this isn't as much of an issue?
Well, we're a large fund. We've got $125 billion under assets, and we pool our funds together. So as you pointed out on the tax implications, it's such an important topic for our members. So those members in accumulation phase, they pay 15% tax or up to 15% tax on investment earnings through accumulation phase. Now, a lot of Australians stay in accumulation phase throughout their retirement simply because they don't know any better. But what they've got the opportunity to do once they hit that retirement milestone is move that money over into the pension environment. And by doing that, any investment earnings are now tax-free. So that's this tax that you're no longer paying. You're no longer giving that to the government. It's in your account, and it makes such an incredible difference over many retirement years.
Particularly when you factor in things like franking credits as well.
Spot on. So all of that is refunded back into the member's account, which all creates a greater retirement outcome for our members.
It's like I'm watching two super enthusiasts just living the dream right now. And it's like, okay, all right, this is cool. Can I just take it a couple of steps back slightly? Because...
Sorry, I got a little bit...
No, that's okay. It is what I've come to expect from you. But in terms of the role that advisors actually play within a super fund and say the different levels of help. So kind of going back to where we started and say that all you know is that you need some help. So I am a customer. All I know is that I don't know anything. What are the kind of the different levels of help that might be available to me?
So I can break it down into 4 categories. Mm-hmm. So first is really around self-driven advice and education. And so there's a lot of tools and resources available to our members at no cost. A lot of these are on our website. We have live and on-demand webcasts. We have a range of articles that really enhance financial literacy for our members. Mm-hmm. We have some really sophisticated financial calculators as well. And that's around seeing how you're tracking for your retirement savings or what type of income that you can achieve in retirement. And as I said, these are really new calculators and a high level of sophistication because members can play around with certain variables, change their age that they might want to retire or their risk profile, and they can see under certain conditions how their retirement might look. And again, this is at no cost for our members. So that's really our first category of advice and education for our members. From there, we then have our general advice service. So members can call in our team on the phone or they can meet with one of our super consultants in person or via video. Again, this is at no cost to our members. And this is a great opportunity for a member to bring up their account, bring up their super fund and ask questions. So they can ask about, how is my super invested? What are my options? What type of insurance do I have? We can point out, maybe you don't have a beneficiary nomination. So that's a wonderful way to provide a good level of understanding for our members.
And so that's specific to that member. It is not just generic advice. It is actually looking at the information on the system and saying this is what your setup currently is.
That's correct. And that's why it's such a groundbreaking service within the superannuation industry. And since COVID, obviously, video meetings have become a lot more popular and we have a lot of academics and teachers as members of the fund. So they're time poor, like a lot of Australians. So this is a wonderful way, obviously, to book in 30 minutes to view your super, do a super health check and see how they're tracking.
This is why I bang on everyone should pick up the old-fashioned telephone and give someone a call. This, this is the level of service we can now get, which is so important and so incredibly helpful.
Now, did you say there were 4 levels?
There was.
Because I was quite sure I only counted 2 there. I'm like, pretty sure you owe us 2 more.
I've got 2 more. Okay. So 3 is our select advice service or scaled advice. So this is where at a low-cost entry point at $80, you can meet with a financial advisor and receive advice around super contributions, investments, or insurance. So it's a really good entry-level way to obtain personal advice to your needs from an expert.
Wow. $80.
Absolutely. Low cost offering, really popular option with our members.
Okay, that is 3.
That's 3. Number 4, more. Last one, is our comprehensive advice service. And this is the world that I live in. This is our holistic advice offering. Not only we're providing advice on superannuation and retirement planning, but insurance, investments, a lot of non-super products such as investment bonds, managed portfolios, even public ancillary funds for those charitably inclined. So very holistic. And with that, the fees are on a fee-for-service basis, typically range from around $3,000 to $5,000. And there's a lot of value for that fee that the member is receiving.
Who is the typical type of person that's taking up this incredible opportunity? What do they look like, and what are the questions or areas of advice and help that they're asking for?
And this is what makes my job so great. On a day-to-day basis, we're seeing such different types of individuals. So one day I might be meeting with a CEO of a company or a vice chancellor of a university. On another day, it might be a primary school teacher who's worked hard for 40 years and wants to obviously retire. So they vary quite considerably, but what doesn't change is really the essence of financial advice, where we're asking a lot of questions about what their goals and dreams are and really formulating ideas and strategies to put them in a better position.
I think that's really interesting, Matt, though, that there's the 4 levels of advice. And oh, look at me making another assumption here.
But it means there's something there for everyone. No one is left out.
Well, what I was actually wondering was whether you see people going, you know what, I'm just going to kind of test the waters a little bit with the $80 kind of select advice or scaled advice, and just going, okay, I'm just going to start the conversation. And then they go, actually, that was helpful. Now I'm going all in.
Absolutely. And that's very common. And when a member starts asking questions, we actually encourage them to first go through our super consultant service, that complimentary service. So no cost, you can get a really good understanding for where your current position is. And from there, you can get triaged either into the select advice service at low cost, or if you've got more complex needs, straight into the comprehensive service.
This is fascinating.
It's brilliant.
Anyway, we have a lot more questions, and you look at Kanna and you just see she's twitching a little bit. She wants to get into the detail here.
I'm actually feeling, there you go with your assumptions, I'm actually feeling incredibly proud right now that we can let everyone know about this, because I'd say 90% of people don't know this exists.
Well, I didn't.
Well, there you go.
But then again, we have seen the depths of my ignorance on some topics, haven't we, Kanna? We'll come back in a second. We need to take a quick break, but I want to talk about risk profiles. I want to talk about some of the different investment choices that are available within funds, and basically how you help people to that point, the questions that you are asking, and really what somebody can expect when they do pick up the phone and what the end result might be. But we'll come back in a second to do that. Kanna, we are talking today all about superannuation advice. We're talking about advice within UniSuper, and we're joined today by Matt Waraxo, State Manager of Advice for New South Wales at UniSuper, which is a supporter of this podcast. But like you, I mean, you said before that you were, what was it? You weren't taken aback. I've forgotten the word. That you were amazed.
Proud.
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 Yeah, you were proud to be able to kind of bring this kind of information, because it is something that people do not realise, the level of advice that is available within super funds these days, and particularly, obviously, because we're speaking to you, Matt, within UniSuper. We talk a lot. No, we don't talk a lot. Kanna talks a lot about risk profiles on this podcast. And when you're dealing with members, when you are looking at their super, how do you actually establish what their risk profile is?
It's a bit of a journey, and it's such a great question, and it's so important, as Kanna said. So firstly, we start with their current position. Yeah. So I've listened to a few podcasts now, Kanna. I know you said that a lot of Australians are defaulted into the typical balanced option. So what does that actually mean? So that typically means there's a bias towards growth assets like Australian shares, international shares and property, and a low weighting to defensive assets like cash, term deposits and bonds. So we want to get a good understanding and provide some clarity to members around where their current position is. From there, we want to start some dialogue around risk and their willingness to take on a certain level of risk and how that impacts their financial goals. So some of the questions that we ask, firstly, we want to get an understanding of what stage of life they're in. Mm-hmm. So are they an early accumulator, or are they in their peak earning years, or are they preparing for retirement or even retired?
An early accumulator, I'm assuming, is someone quite early in their in their working career.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
maybe they're single with few financial commitments, or they're starting to have a family.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
Okay.
What are the available investment choices then for the individual risk profiles?
So UniSuper provides a lot of flexibility, and there's really two categories of investment options at UniSuper. So there are the pre-mixed options. So we've got 7 pre-mixed options with a variety of different risk profiles, from conservative all the way up to high growth. And really, what differentiates these pre-mixed options are around the asset allocation. So for a conservative pre-mixed option, it might have 70% in defensive assets and 30% in growth assets. And then at the high growth option, you've got 100% in shares and property or growth-oriented investments. So you can see the different scale of risk that you might be taking there. So with our pre-mixed options, that's what we've got. And then we've got 9 single sector options, which specialize in individual asset classes. So you might have cash or Australian shares or listed property. And so what we find are the pre-mixed options are there really to set and forget for our members. So if they have a really good understanding of their risk profile, they can choose one of these pre-mixed options and obviously set and forget. And by set and forget, they should actually revisit it from time to time because their risk profiles can change over the years.
Singing off the same page.
Goodness me.
And then there's the single sector options are more of a DIY approach and probably need a bit more monitoring and supervision over the years. But they can be really tailored to an individual's needs.
How do you decide, or how do these members decide on making that change? Because it feels like a big thing to do, to actually go, you know what, my risk profile is this, I'm actually going to make this change and go to perhaps higher growth, or what are some of these factors that people are actually taking into account then? Is it kind of more weighted towards their stage of life in terms of, if I'm kind of focused on this, the early accumulators, as you mentioned before, is really the amount of time that they've got before they get to retirement, one of those really key factors as to what is going to drive them or push them towards a particular class?
Absolutely. And if you think about a 30-year-old, they're not going to be able to touch their superannuation for 30 years. So their investment time horizon is significant. So they might be willing to take on, this is generalizing of course, but they might be willing to take on higher risk for a potential higher return over time. Now, taking on higher risk comes with potential volatility, but riding that over a 30-year period, they might be willing to do that.
Okay.
What are the steps? Like, how do I access this? So if I'm someone who has been wanting to get advice for a really long time, overwhelmed, confused, and just feeling a little bit insecure perhaps, how do I tap into this? Where do I find you and your wonderful team?
Step 1 is really visiting the UniSuper website. Look at the tools and resources there. From there, you can phone us. Let's have a chat. We can look at, obviously, discuss your investment options, book in a time with a superannuation consultant. That's key. That's, again, there's no obligation there starting with a superannuation consultant. It's no cost. And from there, if you feel like you are craving more information, more tailored personal advice, then we can absolutely book you in to sit in front of one of our advisors. And
sorry, I feel like I now go backwards. Like we kind of make so much progress, and then I take about 3 steps back to clarify something I heard about 20 minutes ago. But no, just on the depths of the advice and the level of the advice that you can give, because I suppose this might be a misconception that because it is accessing advice within UniSuper, in the end, though, you do have the interests of members at heart. And here's probably the big question. If it was in somebody's interest to have their money somewhere else, could you advise them to take their money to perhaps another fund?
It's such a great question. And absolutely. Individual advisors have a member's best interest duty. And there has to be a significant benefit to move that super or put them into a certain product. We ask a lot of questions from our members around product preferences. So we need to ensure that that aligns to a certain recommendation on a product. So yes, in some cases, even as a UniSuper employee, I'm not recommending UniSuper as the fund of choice. And people would be surprised by that, but it absolutely comes back down to member best interest. Thankfully, UniSuper is such a great product with its low fees, great performance and great service that, there is a strong argument there, but absolutely there are other products that are also really suitable for members.
That's such important peace of mind, knowing that you're getting honest advice that is truly aligned to your individual needs, and that you're upholding everyone's best interest and there's no conflict there. That's essential.
I just love the fact that I mean, we have talked a lot about some of the challenges within the advice kind of industry, and one of these big hurdles is affordability. And people not being able to, and particularly perhaps people who need the advice most, not being able to access the advice. And the fact that there are that kind of the 4 levels of advice is something that looking at it from an outsider's perspective, that is pretty encouraging.
Absolutely. It's what UniSuper's goal is to educate and provide financial literacy to all our members. So where cost is a barrier for a lot of Australians, we have these services available.
You look very happy, Michael. Look at the glow on your face.
Well, I am happy. I'm happy because I know that you'll be happy now hearing all of this. And basically, if you're happy, it means that I'm less likely to get in trouble for saying something that is mildly ignorant at one point.
Give it a couple of minutes. I'm sure you will say something.
Thank you. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for sharing everything. That's such important information and so helpful to so many people who really do need it right now.
That was Matt Waraxo, State Manager of Advice for New South Wales at UniSuper, which, as we have mentioned multiple times, is a supporter of this podcast. It feels like we have actually covered quite a bit of ground and about a topic that we have talked about on a number of occasions, but I feel like there's been a lot of clarity provided today. The fact that within UniSuper, that there is the opportunity for advice, and that there is those 4 levels: the self-driven advice and education, particularly kind of via the website and the information there, the general advice service, the select advice or scaled advice, which, as I have mentioned 40 times now, is just $80, which I just find fascinating, and then the comprehensive advice, which is obviously the more kind of detailed offering, where there is a greater depth of advice available. We talked as well about risk profiles and about the process that Matt and your team that you go through in order to establish somebody's risk profile, and really the questions, a sample of the questions that are asked when you are looking at somebody's risk profile, and then some of those investment choices that are available based on the risk profile, and then how you kind of weigh up making the change and the level of advice. And I do come back to that final point that you made, Matt, that really it is advice with the member's interest at heart, which I think does an awful lot in terms of, as you said, Canna, that it gives peace of mind heading into a conversation like this, that it is your money, and the advisors are going to be giving you advice that are going to look after your money best.
Absolutely. And I do truly believe it is life-changing. The advice that you can get benefiting you right now, but also well into the future. And that peace of mind knowing, okay, I've got a plan. I know how to stick to it. We can make some reviews and adjustments when need be, but I'm doing the best thing I can do with my resources, and I'm making smart, intelligent decisions with my hard-earned money.
All right, Canna, how do we find you?
The best place to get in contact with me at the moment is Instagram at Sugar Mama TV. You can shoot me through a DM and I'll come back to you as soon as I possibly can.
And you can hear me every day with Sean Aylmer on Fear and Greed, Australia's best business podcast. Thank you very much for listening to How Do They Afford That? Remember to hit follow on the podcast, and please leave us a review too. We love seeing good reviews. Next week, we are talking about ADHD and money. It is a topic that we have been asked to do by a few listeners who have gotten in touch, and it is going to be a really interesting conversation. Don't miss it.